Hello, Gogopreneur listeners. In this episode of Gogopreneur, I am going to interview my tax attorney. His name is Toby Mathis, and he is one of the founding members of Anderson Advisors. And he's the one, him and his amazing team from Las Vegas, Nevada, are the one who are responsible for all of our companies, all of our holding companies, all of our assets, the asset planning, the tax savings, the trust, pretty much everything that an entrepreneur needs to have to A, have your businesses structured properly, B, save on your taxes when it comes to 7 digits plus income, and then most importantly, hiding those assets so you're protecting yourself and your future. So let's get to know Toby. And then we also, under this episode, you're going to find the direct link where you can get a free, what is that called? Business evaluation kind of from Toby and Toby's team to see if Anderson Advisors will be a good fit for you. So make sure to click under this episode on YouTube or on our website and go to the link, get your appointment for free, and see if this is something that you need, you want, you can afford, and that can help you with. So let's get to know Toby.
Welcome to Gogopreneur, where Gogo Bethke, your host, interviews badass rock star entrepreneurs of the world, figuring out who they are, how they got to where they're at, and the lessons they learned along the way, so you can learn those lessons and turn it into money. Let's go get them.
Hello, my Gogopreneur friends. Are you frustrated by not knowing how to reach that 7-digit mark in your business? Maybe kind of like stuck in the progress? I want to invite you to gogetemcommunity.com. It is your last stop to becoming a 7-digit entrepreneur. You will have access to monthly live calls with me and industry experts and Q&As at the end. Every training video is recorded. We have a massive knowledge library. You will have access to my team. Tuesdays for Tech Tuesdays and Wednesdays, you have direct access to my VAs. Ask them absolutely anything, how we have built everything in all of my businesses. You will have access to a private Facebook group and a private Facebook chat. And that's where I communicate directly with all of our members. That's where I share my thoughts, my ideas, a new app, books that I'm reading, videos that I'm watching, anything I'm feeding to my brain, any systems that I'm implementing into my business. That is your direct access to me, your direct access to each other and like-minded entrepreneurs in the industry. Join us today to transform your business. Go to gogetemcommunity.com. Well, thank you, Toby, for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
So nice to see you again. So Gogopreneur is a podcast for entrepreneurs of the world, of mostly probably from this country, right? So I wanted to have you on here as my tax attorney, since you and your team are the ones who took us from, yes, we had some LLCs when we started working with you guys, but really building that massive, robust system, not only to make sure that it's built properly, but also to make sure that we are protected and set up for generations to come. And that's really what I would like to talk with you about, to help our audience to make sure that they have their systems, their companies set up properly, the structures properly, and really what's important to, save your money as you're building it, protect those assets as you're building it, and set it up for the future generations to come. So where do we start?
Yeah, great summary, by the way, because that's exactly what people tend to not focus on when they're opening up a business. It's right in front of their face, right? They're just looking at whatever's happening today and reacting quite often. They're not being too deliberate, and that can yield some negative results. So the way I look at it is there's 3 words that I care about: preserve, protect, and prosper. Preserving something that you're building so it doesn't rot from the inside. Protecting it from lawyers, snoops, Uncle Sam, everybody that's trying to take it from you, because believe it or not, as you build wealth, there's going to be people that try to take it from you. Our government's probably the worst perpetrator of that. The more you make, the more they take. And if you don't take action, you'll be surprised that they're taking half of everything you're making. Mm-hmm. And then prospering, allow you to continue to grow your assets. If you do those things well, you're going to be very successful. If you do them poorly, it doesn't mean you're definitely going to fail, but the likelihood of failure gets increased exponentially the longer you go into it, just because there's certain things that just happen in life, and you don't want one of those to take you out. So it really gets down to being very deliberate about what you're setting up and recognizing what the risks are, and even more importantly, what the benefits are to setting things up in a particular way.
Yeah. So where does one start? So what do you think? I don't know. This might be a question that neither one of us knows the answer to. in the real estate world, right? In the realtor 1099 world, what percentage of realtors do you think don't have an LLC?
Oh, it's got to be greater than 70%.
Wow. So why does one should have an LLC? Like I always say, treat your business as a business, right? But why should one have an LLC and not just run business under a 1099?
Well, I'll use the easy phrase of what's the worst thing that could happen, right? So people get into business and they don't think about liabilities that could follow them around the rest of their life, right? So as a realtor, we think, oh, what are the chances of me being sued? Well, actually, pretty good, right? Anytime there's a fluctuation in the market or somebody buys a house and it doesn't make as much as they thought it would, or it goes down in value, or you find like termites. That's a real life example of somebody that I was dealing with that's living that right now. You could end up with litigation against you. We had $1 billion litigation against the realtors associations, right? You've seen these things happening and you're wondering, well, what impact could it have on me? Well, if you don't have a box around your business, and when I say a box, I mean a liability protection device like an LLC or an S Corp, something that makes the business liabilities solely the businesses, not yours personally, but just the business. So an LLC, for example, if I put a box around my realtor business, then anything I do as a realtor should stay inside that box, so long as I respect the box and do the things necessary underneath the state statute. Usually it involves paying an annual fee and having one meeting a year, something like that, and respecting its separate existence by, if it needs a tax return, doing the tax return, keeping books on your income and expenses. You have to do that anyway, but keeping it separate from your personal groceries and those
Not
types of things.
commingling money.
They call it commingling. It's a fancy way of saying keep it separate. If
Yeah.
it's business, keep it in the business account. When you have commissions come in, don't have it just go into your personal account, have it go into the business account. A lot of people think, well, but they'll only pay me individually. You could still put it in the business account. Just keep it separate. There's plenty of ways to do it. And if you do that, the reward is, hey, if you do get sued because somebody has termites and they decide that you should have told them, even if you did, even if they saw it you had an inspection and it said there's termites, they still sue you. What you don't want is to go to a jury and have that jury decide you're the rich realtor and this poor person, you owed this, some crazy heightened sense of duty to do even more disclosure to them, even though you did it. And you end up with a judgment against you. And they garnish you for the next, I'll use real life example. I've gone after folks in a previous life. You'll garnish them for 11, 12, 13 years as long as the judgment is out there. It could go on forever and they could even garnish your estate. So you want to be able to cut that off and say, hey, if there is a liability occurrence where it's going to impact my life, I need to be able to shut down my business and just say, you know what, that liability is in the past. Reform as something else and go about your life. What that does by having that wrapper around it is actually forces settlement. And so a lot of people think, ha, 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 I'll get a judgment against me. They won't be able to collect. No, you don't want to go to trial. You don't want to have litigation in your life. It's expensive, time consuming, annoying. You wake up at 3 a.m. and you're Perry Mason and you're thinking of all the things you're going to do to the other party. You have dark thoughts, right? You're just like, well, I'm going to get that. You don't want that in your life.
Yeah.
You want to be able to say, hey, here's the most you're able to get. I'll settle for this to make it go away. Usually it's insurance that's doing that. What you don't want is someone to just have unfettered access to all of your assets. And surprisingly enough, you may not have assets today. In 5 years, you may have assets. That's about the length of time it's going to take for a trial to go to jury and then go through supplemental proceedings where they're collecting against you. So you may think, I don't have anything for them to take, but you might, right?
Like,
You're working.
yeah, I remember when you told me the future income, and I was like, hold on a minute, what?
It happens, and we see it all the time. And even if you're a business, so we have plenty of clients that do very well and they keep all their money in the business. That's inside the box, right? So as we go on, part of what we're doing is saying we want to isolate the business and keep it kind of poor. right? We don't want to have $1 million sitting in the business. We want to remove it from the business, hopefully in a tax advantaged manner, and get it into something that has no exposure to third parties. Like in the perfect world, like think of your house, you might have a safe in your house. Well, somebody could sneak into your house and steal your safe, right? You want to bury that safe to where nobody can see it. It's not dealing with anybody. Nobody knows it exists. And then you stuff it full of cash, securities, investments, things like that, that don't have liability. Like nobody's going to sue you because you own Microsoft shares. But if you're a realtor, they could sue you for breach of contract, breach of a fiduciary duty, fraud, misrepresentation, falling below the standard of care, failure to disclose. Like there's a laundry list of things that they could sue you for. So we don't want a bunch of assets sitting there. So it's kind of a system where you go and say, you know what? I need to be very methodical about this. Where does my liability come from? If I am a realtor, it's from my activities as a realtor, but I'm also a human being. I'm out driving around as an individual. What if I get into a car accident? Or if you have kids, what if my kids get into a car accident? I'm liable for it. Personally, how do I make sure they can't take everything else I own? That's where you start entity structuring. And that's what the wealthy do. I'll just be straight up with you. Invariably, the wealthy have a three-prong approach. They have their businesses, generally speaking, in separate boxes and separate entities. They have their safe assets in a separate entity, and it's all held by a living trust. 99% of the time, it's going to be a trust so that they can avoid probate, keep out of court, keep away from having to deal with a bunch of nonsense. And as a result, they prosper and they have generational wealth. If you don't do those things, then you're going to have issues. And it's, if you don't do any of it, there's a good chance at some point something's going to wipe you out.
So I wanted to share super quick on the stage the best way to get a consultation and a free consultation with Toby and his team by going to aba.link/GogoPod. So again, it's aba.link/GogoPod. And their team will jump on a free consultation. You will share where you are in your business, and they will tell you which product of theirs and which services of theirs is the best fit for you. Now, of course, I took advantage of the lifetime free LLCs. I don't know if you guys still do that. You probably don't because I scared you away from it, do you? I was like, wow, free LLCs. Okay, sign me up for that. So I prepaid, so sad for a lifetime of free LLCs. And I had used it. I had put it to very good use. I'm getting my pennies out of that one, let me tell you. So Toby, let's take it to the next step of the process. So now someone that they understand the fundamentals need of an LLC, right? There's different LLCs, right? So I remember when you suggested for one of my LLCs to be in a C Corp, and I was like, hold on a minute. I know I have a couple S Corps. What's a C Corp, right? So can we then take it to the next level of now that you have your LLC and you have your box, right? Within that box, at what point does one decide if they need an S Corp or a C Corp, and are there any other options?
Yeah, that's a great question. And an LLC does not exist to the IRS, right? There's no such thing as an LLC tax return. Doesn't exist. You tell the feds, here's how I want it to be taxed. So a lot of people set up an LLC and they elect to have it what we call disregarded, which means, hey, feds, ignore it. It's just going on my tax return. So if I'm a realtor and I just don't want the liability hanging around, I could set up an LLC and it doesn't have to file a tax return. I file the tax return. I do nothing different than what I'm doing now. I just now have a liability protection wrapper around me. And that's the simplest thing to do. And that's actually really intelligent. When you get around $30,000 a year of net income, like your profit, that's when it makes sense to look at changing it to an S Corp for tax purposes. So you can be an LLC and it could be taxed as an S Corp. You could be an LLC and it could be ignored. You could be an LLC and it could be taxed as a partnership. You could be an LLC and it could be taxed as a corporation. All of those things are up to you as to how you want it to be treated by the federal government, by the IRS. You get to choose. For most realtors, I would say this, that you're going to save a considerable amount of money. If you're making, let's just say $100,000 a year, you will make about $10,000 more per year in your pocket if you make that S election. And the reason is simple, because as a sole proprietor, you pay something called Social Security taxes on 100% of your income. And Social Security taxes are made up of old age, disability, and survivors, and Medicare portion. When you add those up, it's 15.3%. You get a slight deduction, so the math is really about 14.1%. And I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this, but just think of this. If I have $50,000 of profit that hits me individually, I'm going to pay about $7,000 in tax for Social Security. Not even federal income taxes, not even state. It's that Social Security tax that just kills you. If that $50,000 came through an S Corp, you pay zero on the Social Security tax.
That's but then there's a fee, right? So the reason I want to make sure everybody understands why you shouldn't do an S Corp right away, right? So when you do an S Corp, you're going to have to now collect a salary. Am I correct?
It depends. So when you're an S Corp, there's no salary requirement unless you're taking distributions of net profit out of the company.
Yeah.
So for some realtors, maybe they have a spouse and all they're doing is accumulating money. And, for the first 3 or 4 years, they're just going to leave the money in there to compound. So they're growing their business. In that particular case, you don't have to take a salary. But if you are living off the money, then you take a reasonable salary, which generally speaking, the courts have held it to be about a third of the profit. So a rule of thumb is, let's just say 30% of whatever the net income is, whatever the profit is, you should take 30% of it as a salary every year. After that, you don't owe any employment taxes. So if you make $100,000 of net profit, so after all your expenses, you're sitting on $100,000, and that went to you individually, you would pay $14,100 in employment taxes on that $100,000. If instead we paid ourselves a small salary, you are going to pay employment taxes. It's going to be on the salary only. So you're going to pay 14.1% on the
30,000.
Yeah, so it's going to be about $4,200 ish, right? And instead of the 14,000, the rest of the 70,000 comes out to you. You don't have to do withholding on it either. So you got to make sure that you're paying your tax, but you may not get a refund, right? You may end up paying a little bit, but that's why you work with a tax advisor to make sure that you know what that amount's going to be. But you're gonna keep an extra in that situation, about an extra $10,000 in your pocket on $100,000. That's a huge result, right? That's a massive.
But then the cost where it comes in is the payroll, right?
Payroll and a tax return. Gogo.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. Like if you have to make sure you get to a point where your payroll is not costing you more than the taxes that you're saving, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as you get to that point, in my opinion, you should then make the decision how you want to structure it.
And I agree with you 100%. And I would say that number in my experience, and I've worked with hundreds of thousands of investors. My firm does over 10,000 returns a year. My personal view is it's right around $30,000 a year. So if you're making over 30 grand, you should strongly consider that S Corp, because the benefit, let's just say it's $30,000 of profit, the benefit of saving $1,500 or whatever it ends up being is about, it starts to weigh in the favor of let's go ahead and do it. Otherwise, if you're just making $10,000 a year and this is kind of a side gig, just use the LLC. Understand though, that you're at a heightened risk of audit because, like it or not, sole proprietors are one of the heavily audited categories of taxpayers. It's about 800% higher for a sole proprietor than an S Corp.
800% higher than a 1099 person is going to get audited not having an S Corp, right? So you don't want that. Thank God, I've never had an audit. I never want to have an audit, right? We work very, very hard to keep our books clean as a whistle, right? I can't even imagine what an audit looks like, and I don't want to imagine what an audit looks like. But if you can save yourself from it.
Don't fear the audit. The audit
I have you guys on my side.
Yeah, like an audit could be a letter. Hey, we want you to verify this, and that's an audit. Field audits are few and far between, and I'll tell you what, it's 0.1% for folks making $100 to $200,000 a year. 200,000 is kind of my magic number. I'm like, most people just, hey, hit that $200,000 mark. You go above it, you start getting around the $1 million mark, you're starting to go up. The most heavily audited category of taxpayers, period, is people taking the earned income tax credit. It's not even close. It's 12.6 per thousand versus 2.3 per thousand of everybody else. It's
Okay, so
like
explain me that again. Who are the 12.6?
the people that take the earned income tax credit. So like if you're poor, you just get slaughtered up by the IRS. Like it is not even
Really?
close.
And those are the people who can't even do like representation, like pay to make
That's
sure
what,
that they have the right representation.
that's why they audit them, Gogo. And it just to make it even worse, African Americans are 4 times more likely to be audited of that category than anybody else.
Oh
And
my
they don't collect
gosh.
that data. We don't even know why. But Stanford did a huge study with a number of government departments, and they were shocked. It was 400 to 500% higher. If you're African American and poor, you were just getting tased, and it's not like they collect it. It's just they're not, we don't know how that could be, other than it's an inherently unfair system towards the poor, and you have
And
African
they're
Americans
more
perhaps disproportionately
like
in
someone
that
literally
category.
just told me on the call before this that their husband is getting laid off because everybody in the company got a letter that if they're over the age of 52, they're going to get laid off.
That seems to be a problem. That sounds like age discrimination.
How the heck in 2024 do you fire someone based on their age?
Just because you have a company and they have management doesn't mean they're competent, right? Just
Oh my God. I was like, there's no freaking way. Like, I would have a field day with that. I'm like, so let me get this
it's
straight. The guy just worked for you for 30 years of his life, and now just before you would have to pay him some, retirement money, you're going to be like, sorry, buddy.
well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I just
I mean, I
play
would
with the
just
ball.
assume that that would be illegal to
It
fire
seems
someone
on its
based on
face
their
to be.
age, right?
Yeah,
I mean, what
I'd be
do
having
I
a
know? That's a whole other conversation. Okay, so now you have your S corp or your C corp or your partnership or your sole proprietor. I can't say that word. Sole proprietor. Now what? When does a holding company come into the face, and why?
when you start developing assets on the outside, and so I use probably $50,000 to $100,000, where it would hurt for someone to take that away from you. In other words, the cost, there's enough there so that there's the litigation costs can be absorbed, and then there's still money left over. That's usually what you're looking at. So if somebody sues you, it's not free, right? Somebody's going to have to go. They're going to have to pay for depositions. They're
Are
going
you
to have to
saying
go
that
through the whole rigmarole.
lawyers don't work for free?
Lawyers don't work for free, and most of those
Oh,
lawyers are going to work on a contingency, right? Where they're only going to get paid if they collect something. So they don't tend to sue people that don't have assets. Like the homeless are pretty secure; they can do whatever they want. They're not going to get sued because nobody wants their the grocery cart with full of stuff, right? So, but if you have something that somebody wants to take, and cash is one of it, securities is something else, and it's in your name. I use an example sometimes of like if you were walking down the street at night, it was dark, and one of your neighbors' houses was all lit up. You could see everything inside the house, right? All of a sudden you become a voyeur. You're like, stop it. But let's just say that the door was open and there was a big pile of cash right on the inside of the door, right? You'd be like, there's a section of society that would go help themselves to the cash, right? There's nobody around. It's wide open. There's a big pile of cash, thousands of dollars just sitting there. You don't want that, right? You're tempting fate. It's like leaving your wallet on the sidewalk. There's a percentage of society that will lean down and pick it up and put it in their own pocket, or take the cash out of it and then throw the wallet away, right? You don't want to tempt that portion of society that's willing to do that. So once you start accumulating some cash, and people can start seeing it, you start buying a nicer house, you get a nicer car. You don't want the bullseye on your back. And the way you take the bullseye off your back is to put it in an area that somebody cannot take it. So using the example of walking down the street at night and you look in the house, close the door, turn out the lights, put the cash into a safe. But if somebody broke into your house, they just decided they were going to break into your house. And this has happened to me, by the way. I actually had a safe disappear after I had construction work done on a house I had in Seattle. I had a safe in the back of the closet, bolted in. And, about 2 weeks after I had some windows replaced, the safe disappeared. I had emptied it.
Walked out on the window?
Somebody that was working there probably saw it and then came back in later and got it. Right. But it happens, right? If you have a safe in your house, there's a chance somebody's going to try to steal it. So we bury it in the desert is the way I put it. We use Wyoming because nobody can open your safe and take things out of it. It's completely yours. So we put assets inside. Generally speaking, it's a Wyoming LLC. Your name is not on it in a public record, so nobody can see that you own it. People that are aware of the Corporate Transparency Act, they always say, but don't you have to report it there? But yeah, that's not a public database. That's to the Treasury, the same as your taxes. You can report your taxes every year. I can't pull Gogo's tax return. Nobody can pull my tax return.
You can.
Right. I could pull it. Yeah. If you give me power of attorney, I could, right? But but I can't just go do it, even though like our firm files it, right? But it doesn't mean I can just go and say, hey, let me see Gogo's past returns. I can't do that. Yeah, they did it to to President Trump and Elon Musk and Warren Buffett. That guy's going to jail. He got convicted. That was an IRS agent that was or employee that went rogue, and that's illegal. So your personal information is not in a public record when you're using Wyoming. And if you put things into an LLC, even if somebody sued you, and I use the example of O.J. Simpson, he had a $30 million judgment against him for the Goldmans, and he lived out his last days without ever paying a nickel towards it, right? He was just, they couldn't take certain assets, his NFL player pension, his homestead, the way he had his assets set up. You can't take it. Now, I'm not saying go out and commit horrendous crimes and get away with it. What I am saying is put your non-risk assets, your savings, your securities, your investments, even real estate can go into this structure so that somebody cannot take it from you. Because there's nothing worse. Let's just say, I'll use an example of a realtor who has people working for them. And maybe they misclassify somebody as a contractor when it's an employee, or they make the allegation that they're an employee, and they sue you for discrimination, or they sue you for overtime violations or other violations of law, and it's completely unfair. But you're liable because depending on the state you're in, the bar is really low to make these types of things stick. Right. And you're supposed to be tracking all their hours. I actually had a company. It was a friend of mine who ran a really successful company, over $100 million a year. And they had a reclassification issue during the recession where 600 contractors, and they were contractors. They signed an agreement that they were contractors, everything else. But a lawyer misstep allowed them to reclassify 600 people as employees, and it put the company out of business. Like they didn't have the cash to pay all the back pay and penalties, and with failure to withhold and all the penalties, it just destroyed them. You don't want that, a situation like that, to take all of your assets, right? We want to really limit that and say, here's our total realm of exposure, and here's where we're storing our wealth going forward that nobody can touch.
You get paid for the hour what you bring to the hour. Or in other words, the fastest way for you to earn more is by learning more. Gogetem is your chance to learn from those who have walked the talk. Gogo invites all of the top performers in the industry to guide you through your success journey. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. The roadmap is already laid out. If you haven't figured out how to make money in your sleep yet, you're not running a business. You're stuck in a job. Join Gogetem to learn how to earn passively and have your money doing all the heavy lifting so you don't have to.
To join Gogetem community, just go to www.gogetemcommunity.com and we will see you inside of our most amazing entrepreneurial community ever.
So pretty much a holding company is the way I see it, guys. Imagine all of these different LLCs, right? And then imagine that they're pointing up to a holding company. So instead of there being in your personal name and you owning those LLCs, a holding company is owning them. And then nobody really knows who owns a holding company. So let's talk about that a little bit. So we talked about, opening it in Wyoming, but then how do you really hide someone's existence?
You can take the name off of the real estate That's probably the most effective tool. If I looked at you, for example, Gogo, and let's say that it was somebody who you didn't even know, but they had dealings with you and they were mad at you for some reason, and they go see the lawyer because they're litigious. And believe it or not, there's people in this world that
Oh yeah.
they just sue the hell out of everybody they deal with just because they get paid. Right? There's folks out there, there's people that do fraud, there's people that set people up, there's all sorts of stuff. And they start looking at you and they see that you own 10 pieces of property. The bullseye on your back is absolutely massive. Or you have a tenant and the tenant's mad because they haven't paid their rent and you're going to evict them. So they make allegations against you. The worst case I ever had was a tenant flooded the downstairs of a house so that mold would grow. They let it grow, and then they claimed that they were irreparably harmed by the mold. Right? The landlord didn't do anything wrong. They literally deliberately flooded it and sued for millions of dollars trying to destroy an individual just because they were mad at him. And if I see all those assets, then I'm more likely to come after you, especially if I have a lawyer and the lawyer wants to get paid on contingency. They need to know, if we win, I need to make sure I get paid. So one of the most effective tools is to make sure that they can't see the 10 properties. And in any state, we can get your name off of that property, period. Every state allows grantor trusts, land trusts. We can have nominee trustees. That's how you do it. There's a way to get your name off of anything, even your personal house. We call it a personal residence privacy trust. There is a way to do it.
Unless it's in Florida, then you don't have to put it in a trust. Correct?
Florida, your personal residence has a unlimited homestead exclusion. So nobody can take it from you. That was O.J. Simpson. He owned a house in Florida, $30 million.
Move to Tampa?
Yeah. Texas is the same. So Florida and Texas are the two states where you can't take somebody's house, their personal residence. But it's really the rental residences, right? Most states have some sort of homestead exclusion. I had a unfortunate situation. It was probably 1999, and it was an older lady that I was teaching a class on, and I'm a real estate investor. So I have over 300 properties with my partner client that we own all over. I think we're in 6 states now. But we've been investing for the past 27 years extensively. And I was teaching a class to folks that were working in the real estate realm for asset protection and tax. And this gal came up. She was probably in her 80s.
Oh.
And I asked her, I said, what are you doing here? Are you setting up a legacy? I was assuming she was doing the estate planning, putting up a trust. And she said, no, I lost everything. She had lost 15 pieces of property due to an electrocution by window washers on one of her buildings. She lost all of her properties, every single one, including her home. She lived in Massachusetts, and there wasn't a large homestead exclusion. A lot of people be surprised that it might be 30,000, 60,000 total that you can exclude. So somebody forecloses on you with a large judgment, they could literally take everything, just about everything you own. You could go into bankruptcy and preserve a portion, a small amount of personal assets, a small portion of your equity, but for the most part, you lose everything, right? You're going to end up with very little. That's what she lived through. And I'll tell you what, that left a mark on me. I still remember it. It's one of those weird things where I met thousands of people all over the years, have spoken. I don't even know how many conferences and things like that. And that's the one that sticks in my head, is the look on her face. She lost everything in her 80s. Like, you think you're set. I have 15 properties. I have commercial properties. I have a bunch of real estate. It's cash flowing. Somebody took it from me. And it wasn't my fault. In her case, the property manager hired window washers on a commercial property, and they used a aluminum handle on the squeegee, and they touched an electric wire and electrocuted the gentleman that was holding the squeegee. Metal, I don't know if it was aluminum, but it was metal. And it was enough that it allowed the current to come through and kill him. And they were using a metal ladder, and the guy that was working with them goes to save him, and was electrocuted as well when he touched the ladder. And it was 2 wrongful deaths of young men. The way that they got around the insurance was, one, there wasn't a lot of insurance, and 2, they decided they weren't going to pay because the window washers weren't actively licensed and bonded. They had provided false credentials or expired credentials. So the property manager didn't do their job, but it didn't matter because they were able to go after the property owner. And that's the way it works. The property owner is ultimately responsible for things that happen on that property. And she didn't have any asset protection in place. She had lawyers and accountants. And what they kept saying is, get insurance, get an umbrella, you'll be fine. But there's tons of exclusion. Insurance companies are not in the business of paying out. They're in the business of collecting premium and paying the least amount possible. And if they see something, a liability that's always happening, for example, mold, it's almost always excluded. Acts of God, always excluded. Things that are within the landlord's control, that gross negligence, things like that, excluded. There's lots of exclusions. And in her particular case, the exclusions prevented her from having the coverage that would have at least defended vigorously, but she ended up losing all of her properties. They foreclosed on every single.
This is why I like stories, right? Because I feel like we can talk about facts until the cows come home, but when you share with the story, people can relate and they're like, oh my gosh, I never want to be in that situation. So then, since we talked about a land contract, not a land contract, gosh, a living trust.
Land trust.
Yeah, a land trust, sorry. So let's explain that one super quick.
Yeah, so a trust is a fancy way of saying a contract that has 3 individuals involved in it. The grantor, who's the one who puts the asset in it, a trustee who manages the asset for the benefit of a beneficiary. You could be all 3, like in a living trust. They call that a revocable living trust, a revocable grantor trust. It's, I am the grantor. There's no tax return required until I pass away. I'm just putting it into this agreement for my benefit. And then if I am incompetent, incapacitated, or whatever, it has a new trustee to step in. And if I pass away, it has a new beneficiary or beneficiaries written into the document. Well, the same type of document is a land trust. People have heard of them, and they always think that they have to have a state statute. That's not the case. We have grantor trusts in all 50 states. Many states, such as yours, Florida, actually has a land trust statute. I think it's about 14 states. But all they're doing is saying the title is held by the trustee. So the name on the property is the trustee, but the beneficiary, who has rights to collect rent and occupy, is not in the public record. There's only one state where that's required, and that's Arizona. And you just don't do it because the right to sue is actually the beneficiary, right? Like it's the other, no outside parties get to sue. It's the trustee could sue you. You're hiring the trustee. You're not going to sue yourself, and you're the beneficiary. You're not going to sue yourself, right? So it's kind of silly. It's kind of a toothless statute, but everywhere else, we don't really care. It's not even a requirement. And so what you do is you use a nominee trustee, either a lawyer, trusted advisor, or you set up an LLC in a state like Wyoming and have it be the trustee. Drives people crazy because at the end of the day, your personal name is nowhere on that property.
I own nothing, guys.
That's on paper and a public record. That's a great place to be in.
Yeah.
It's to have control of a lot of assets, but nobody can see that you own them. Yeah. Unless you want to tell them, hey, this is my property, in which case you're putting a bullseye on your back. In this day and age, there are people that target rich folks, period. And we have a victim society. There's, I always laugh because whenever I go to Texas, there's this lawyer called the Hammer, and he's on all these billboards. I'm always thinking, the Hammer's going to hammer you, right? It's like, he's just looking for someone. He's looking for nails. I'm the Hammer. And if you want to look like a nail, go ahead and look like a nail, right? I suggest that you don't. I suggest that, you don't go up against these guys and gals that are just there to take a piece out of you and get paid on a percentage, because they'll ruin your life. They don't care. They'll allege stupid stuff that has no basis with reality just because they can. And there's no ramification if they do. Like most states have this thing called anti-SLAPP. So you can't go after the lawyer, even if they're just acting like a buffoon and making stuff up. and the bar associations don't do anything to these folks. So they just have basically license to ruin your life if they want to. And unfortunately, that's the system we're in right now. Right?
That sounds scary. Sounds like I want to just throw it all at the wind and everybody lose my phone number and go on a never-ending vacation.
I want to make it to where people can't see what I own.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you're going to go through life pretty much unmolested, right?
Yeah.
If your stuff's in the public record, there's a chance somebody's going to target you, unfortunately, in this day and age. And most of the time, I mean, I'll use this as an example. Like if I'm a lawyer and somebody's coming into my office, most lawyers are really, like 99% are really great people. And they're going to look at it and they're going to say, what are your chances? Hey, you really don't have a basis. I'm not going to take this case. There's a portion of the lawyers out there, though, that will take just about anything that walks through their door, and they'll write a demand letter. They'll file litigation just for nuisance value, just to shake you down.
You're saying that there's rotten tomatoes everywhere in every line of work?
Unfortunately, there's no disincentive for it to do it, right? So what they're looking at, though, is they're saying, what are the chances of me winning, and what is the amount that I will win if I'm successful? And then you have to multiply that by the chances of collecting. And if they can't see what you own, the chances of collecting gets pretty close to zero. So no matter what the case is, the value of that case is reduced close to zero. That's what you want. What you want is, even if you make a misstep, you don't want the lawsuit to be filed. You want someone to not know what you have. And if it does show up and you're like, you know what, I screwed up. What I did, what fell below the standard of care, whatever, you need to just be able to settle that and go about your life. What you don't want is for someone to say, I'm not going to settle for a reasonable amount. I want $1 million. And you're like, this thing's worth $5,000. Like, you weren't even really harmed. And they're like, emotional distress, this, that, and the other, and punitive damages, whatever the statute that they could put you under. You want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the way you do that is by, again, keeping your affairs very private. There's an old adage, you make money in the dark. You don't want people to be able to see everything you own and what's going on in your life unless you want to tell them.
Yeah. So let's talk about the living trust then. What's that? When does it come into the picture? Why should someone have one?
Yeah, so I'll put it this way. Like, there's really kind of three choices people have. You could either do a will. A lot of folks are used to a will, where you're saying, hey, if I pass away, you're leaving instructions that a judge follows to distribute your affairs. So by saying that judge follows, you're in court. There's something called intestate, where you don't have any instructions and they go under the state statute, and you go to court and the judge orders transfer of assets under the state statute, like Prince went through, if you remember that. And then you have trusts, where nothing goes through the court because it's held in trust and you don't need to. So those are kind of your three options. There's sometimes a combination where you'll set up a living trust, you'll have your assets, you don't have to go to probate, and there's varying degrees of probate. In some states, there's statutory fees where it could be 8% of the value of the estate, not the net value, the gross value. Like California, you could be looking at paying a lawyer and a personal representative a significant sum. There's states, I just looked at one in Pennsylvania. It was a duplex that was left behind, about $300,000. The probate cost was $13,000, which was the reasonable amount underneath their case law. So the lawyer immediately wants $13,000, and there's really no equity in the house. So the heirs are like, what the heck do I do with this? So we try to avoid that by using a living trust to avoid having to go to court. And it's not you that's going to court, right? It's your heirs. So if you don't want to go to court and you don't want to force your heirs to go to court, then you do a living trust. The other reason you do a living trust is because you can make it to where nobody takes the assets. One of the worst things you could do, in my opinion, after having done this for several decades, is give somebody who's not ready for money a bunch of money. The chances of them keeping it are about 16%, right? They will lose almost every dollar. They'll retain about 16% of it after 5 years. So the vast majority of 84% is going to go bye-bye. because they're not prepared to handle the money. It's the same thing with lottery winners, etc. So with a living trust, you could put somebody else in charge of the money and say, pay them only if they need it. Health, education, maintenance, and support, they call it HEB standard, is pretty universal across the country, and the rich know to use this. Don't give my heirs $1 million because they won't know what to do with it. Instead, have it managed. And it could be a family member. It could be a professional trust organization like Vanguard or whatever. I think they charge 0.5%. But they would manage it for the benefit of your heirs. You can't do that with a will, right? You have to do that with a trust. And the ancillary benefit is you avoid having to go through that probate process. And people say, well, probate's not expensive. These lawyers always say that. I'm like, well, percentage-wise, it's anywhere from 2 to 8%, depending on who you listen to. And on average, AARP did a study, and on smaller and mid-sized estates, they said it was 20% of the estate value was being eaten away by the court process and the probate process. 20% is not a small amount. If you have a $200,000, $300,000 estate, you don't want to lose a chunk of that.
Yeah.
You may not have the liquidity to do it. Like they may have to sell the assets. They may not. In my case, I can tell you, in my family, we lost 2 parcels in Alabama because it was more costly to hire the lawyers than the parcels were worth. You know, my grandma left it to my father, and he opted to just let it go back to the estate, or to the state of Alabama. So he's like, it's too expensive. The lawyers cost too much. That's sad, right? We don't want that to happen. And it's really simple to set up a living trust. They're easy to amend. And it's more than just if you pass away. It's during your lifetime. The power of attorneys for healthcare. So if something happens to you, you have an advocate. We just went through COVID, right? If you did not have a power of attorney, they had do not resuscitate orders in those hospitals, guys. There's people that their life was ended because they did not have these documents. There's financial power of attorneys. If I'm incapacitated, if I can't handle things myself, then there's somebody to step in and act on my behalf, so you don't have to go for a conservatorship in a state, which is maddeningly complicated and expensive. So, for example, if somebody gets Alzheimer's and they don't have this document, you're looking at a court process to be appointed as a conservator of that estate. It's very frustrating if you don't have these documents. But in a living trust, they're a part of it. HIPAA release. So somebody that's an advocate for you medically can actually access some of your medical records. That's helpful, right? So they know how to talk to your doctor. There's a living will. My end of life decisions. Do I want the plug pulled? Do I want to have extraordinary measures to continue my life? All that stuff should be in your estate plan. And with a living trust, it's in there as a matter of course. Like those are almost always included. Schedule of gifts, making sure that your kids don't fight over. I'll use the worst example I saw was a plastic Tweety bird in Georgia. They went to litigation over a $2 Tweety bird that was in mom's kitchen, right? And the brother and sister were just going to tear each other to shreds over this thing. It's really easy for you to say, here's what happens to it. Put it in writing, put it in your trust so that you don't have that fight. And also you can put in a living trust that if you do cause litigation, you're disinherited. So you could put some teeth, say, act like human beings, act like adults, do not fight with each other. That's not what I want. And there could be a ramification as opposed to a reward if they litigate and probate.
Yeah. And since Toby said that's super simple, it is when you work with Toby's team. Even then, so let's go to aba.link/GogoPod if you guys would like to hire Toby's team. So again, it's aba.link/GogoPod. And all you need to do is go on your free consultation and decide which one of their products and services do you need. But with that being said, being simple, it is simple, but it's kind of nerve-wracking. So I remember when we did our living trust of there's so many questions that you just don't really want to think about kind of while you're young and alive, right? But those all going to come up at some point, and these decisions need to be made, right? Like, how do you want to handle it? Like, for example, one of the big ones that you mentioned to me, Toby, is the prenup for the boys, right? Like forcing them that they have to have a prenup. Because think of it this way, guys, we could build all this in this lifetime. I have 2 boys. They're going to get married one day. They're going to inherit things when I pass away, right? And then what? Someone's going to take half of it? I don't think so.
It gets worse than that, Gogo. So depending on what state you're in, you could build up an estate, have children, you pass away. And we actually have a really good case on this. If you remember Anna Nicole Smith,
Oh yeah.
she married the billionaire. He was 80 years old. She was a 28-year-old playmate, and then he passed away. The entire estate went to her, not to his kids. And if you remember, the kids sued for fraud. They both, the main child, the oldest child, and Anna Nicole Smith passed away during the pendency of that action. Like, it went on that long. It was a huge fight. And people never really think about this, but what about his wife? You know, his widow, or not widow, but his deceased wife, right? She passed away before him. Do you think she wanted the estate to go to his new spouse, or do you think she wanted it to go to her kids? If you don't have that in writing, guess what? It's going to go to the new spouse. In a living trust, we do what's called Q-tips, and there's these qualified terminal interest provisions where you have the amounts go into trust for the benefit of the surviving spouse and then to the kids. So it gets locked away. Here's where it goes. It goes into this trust. The surviving spouse still gets the benefit of it, and they're supposed to use their own trust first. In most cases, they're going to say, use your assets first. But it prevents you from disinheriting your kids by example, by mistake. Now, I had this happen in my family. I had it happen with my great-grandfather. And he left it to an aunt that was helping. He left a house and a bunch of assets to the aunt that was living with him and taking care of him, his caregiver. And she was like the matriarch of the family. So she said, do not worry, this will stay within the family. And she got married. She was over 70 years old, and she got married to a gentleman, and they never did an estate plan. So when she passed away, who inherited everything? He did.
Then your husband.
Yep. And then he said, oh, I'll take care of it. Don't worry. I'll make sure that this doesn't leave your family. He never did an estate plan. He passes away, and it went to his kids, who said, don't worry, you can buy it at the estate sale. We're going to sell the entire estate. You could come in here and bid on things. And nobody could afford, because these were antique guns. This was all the memorabilia from great-grandfather. This was the house was worth a ton. Nobody could buy anything. So everything ended up going to these kids. That was never the intent of great-grandfather, I could promise you.
No.
And we see this happen again and again and again. And especially when you have Brady Bunch families, I have kids from a previous marriage and stuff. You could very easily disinherit your kids by not having an estate plan.
Oh my gosh, that sounds scary. What would be the point, right, of working this hard for a lifetime to then just lose it at the back end? So Toby, one of the best ways for people to find you, it's your YouTube.
Yeah,
learn from you, I should say, YouTube. So on YouTube, you can
videos.
look for. Oh, that's odd. 800. That's amazing. So guys, you can go to YouTube, just search for Toby, T-O-B-Y, Mathis, M-A-T-H-I-S, and continue the learning. Also, Toby is one of our amazing teachers, Toby and his team. So his lessons are a part of the Gogetem community membership. They have their own section in there. If you're not a Gogetem member, you definitely want to join us to continuously learn not only how to make money, right? We talk about that all the time, but also how to protect it, how to grow it, save it, and sleep good at night. And that's why Toby and his team are our teachers inside of the Gogetem community. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure that we mentioned today, Toby, is one of your books. I know you said you wrote 6 of them. One of them called Infinity Investing, and you guys can find that in my Amazon store as well, or on Amazon. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is the fun of doing people's taxes that are investors and that are successful, is that I can steal all their ideas and that's what I do. I'm like, hey, what are you making money on consistently? Having gone through the .com bust and the Great Recession, and and we had COVID, you've had pandemics, you've had terrorist attacks, you've had all these things that have occurred that have made changes in the economy, whatever. At the end of the day, you see people consistently making money throughout all these things, and they're doing kind of the same thing over and over again. And that's what infinity investing is. It's really building perpetual wealth. And it's the idea that you should be investing in assets that are cash flow assets that will continue to pay not just you, but as you create a legacy, you want the money to continue to flow into your estate, even when you're gone, for an infinite period of time. And it's just mathematical stuff that actually works, so that you don't chase after the quick riches or some of these folks out there that are gurus telling you do this, that, or the other. You can actually do things that work, that mathematically are certain, that have worked for thousands of other people consistently over a long period of time, in good times and in bad, right? You want to do the things that the wealthy folks have been doing. And it's not a mystery. It's actually fairly straightforward. I say it's simple, but it ain't easy, right? It's like, if you want to lose weight, move more, eat less. For the most part, it's the same thing. If you want to build wealth, live on less than what you make and follow some simple rules. But where you put that money becomes really critical, and that's what infinity investing is about.
Thank you so much. So once again, guys, you can hire Toby's team and go to aba.link/GogoPod. And if you would like to learn from Toby in our Gogetem community, go to gogetemcommunity.com, and we would love to have you. Toby, thank you so much. We are at the hour. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge today. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for not only sharing your knowledge with the world, but also originally shared it with me so then I can sleep good at night. Or I should say, Dwayne and I can sleep good at night.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining Gogopreneur. Keep that go-getter spirit alive. Until next time, go get 'em.